I showed up at my parents' 40th anniversary dinner. My aunt snapped. Don't touch the lobster. That's for the real family. My cousin smirked. Yeah, $5,000 dinners aren't for freeloaders. I just smiled, took a bite, and walked out. They used my card for that reservation. I reversed the charge. Later, they opened my gift and froze. I'd candled the family cruise I booked. Then, 83 missed calls hit my phone. I was the one they called for bailouts, for loans and never got repaid, for birthday parties and emergency rent, and I let them do it, thinking it was just what family did. When my parents' 40th anniversary rolled around, I figured it was my shot to show some gratitude, to do something nice for the people who had at least tried to give me a decent start in life. So, I booked a private room at one of the best waterfront restaurants in the city. Crystal glasses, white glove servers, a view of the bay so stunning it felt like a painting. The reservation alone set me back $5,000, but I told myself it was worth it. I walked in a bit late, having had to wrap up a client call. The table was full, my family already seated and chatting, the clatter of silverware against bone china echoing off the polished walls. My seat, right in the center, was conspicuously empty. My Aunt Karen, the self-appointed queen of the family, glanced up as I slid into the chair. Her mouth tightened for just a moment before she plastered on a smile. I reached for the lobster platter in the center of the table, the crown jewel of the spread, when Karen leaned over, her voice dropping to a sharp, cold whisper. "Don't touch the lobster," she said, her eyes narrowing. "That's for the real family." I froze, my hand still hovering over the polished silver tongs. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Then, from my left, my cousin Jake snorted, leaning back in his chair with that smug frat boy grin he never outgrew. "Yeah, $5,000 dinners aren't for freeloaders," he added, swirling his wine glass like some knockoff Gordon Gekko. I looked around the table, feeling the heat creep up my neck. My sister Amy, who I'd helped cover 3 months of mortgage payments last year, looked away, suddenly very interested in her scallops. My Uncle Frank, the one who had called me last month begging for a bridge loan to keep his failing landscaping business afloat, was chuckling quietly, his eyes glued to his plate. Even my parents, seated at the head of the table, didn't so much as flinch. For a second, I felt like I was floating outside my body, looking down on this twisted scene. These people, my flesh and blood, had just cut me down at a table I paid for, at a dinner I arranged, in a room reserved under my name. They had the nerve to treat me like an outsider, a second-ass guest at my own damn party. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Slowly, deliberately, I reached down, grabbed a massive chunk of lobster, dunked it in the drawn butter, and bit down, never breaking eye contact with Jake. I chewed slowly, savoring the rich, buttery taste, feeling the weight of their shocked stares. I set the napkin back down on the table, pushed my chair back, and stood up. Without another word, I turned and walked out, the echoes of their whispers following me into the hallway, down the polished marble steps, and out into the warm night air. I slid into my car, the leather creaking under me, and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My heart was pounding, my mind racing, but a strange, icy calm settled over me. They wanted to draw lines. Fine. I'd make those lines permanent. Before I even pulled out of the parking lot, I called my bank. The entire dinner, all $5,000 of it, was on my card. One short call later, the charge was reversed. As I pulled into my driveway, a second thought hit me, and a slow grin crept onto my face. The family cruise I booked as a surprise for my parents. A 7-day luxury trip through the Caribbean, private suites, full excursions, the whole 9 yards. I walked inside, dropped my keys on the counter, and pulled up the confirmation email. A few clicks, a quick chat with customer service, and the $20,000 booking vanish from their manifest. I watched the cancellation confirmation slide into my inbox, feeling lighter than I had in years. By the time I poured myself a whiskey and settled into my armchair, my phone started buzzing. My sister's name flashed on the screen, then my aunt's, then Jake's. The notifications piled up like a slot machine hitting a jackpot. 83 missed calls by morning. And this was just the start. I expected fallout, but I didn't expect it to hit so quickly. By the next morning, my phone looked like a battlefield of missed calls and angry texts. I ignored them all, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and sat down at my desk, feeling a calm I hadn't felt in years. It was like cutting a weight loose, letting it drop into the ocean, and watching the ripples disappear. The first to crack was my sister Amy. She showed up at my door around noon, her face flushed, eyes darting nervously like a kid caught stealing. She had her 3 kids in tow, who immediately started ruffusing in my foyer, knocking into the side table where I kept the only family picture I hadn't packed away. A photo of my boys from before my wife shattered everything. Amy wasted no time. "Matthew, what the hell happened last night?" she blurted, her voice tight. "The restaurant said the reservation was canceled and the card didn't go through. Mom was so embarrassed we had to pull cash just to cover the wine." I leaned back, sipping my coffee, and watched as her kids started tugging at the throw pillows on my couch. I let the silence stretch out, watched her squirm, her cheeks turning a deeper shade of red. "Oh," I said finally, setting my mug down. "Must have been a misunderstanding. Maybe the real family should have handled it." Her mouth fell open, eyes wide as if I had slapped her. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize, maybe even show a flicker of shame for the way they ganged up on me. Instead, she straightened, trying to regain some of that smug superiority I'd gotten so used to over the years. "That's not funny, Matthew," she shot back. "Mom and Dad were humiliated. They had to apologize to the restaurant staff. Do you have any idea how expensive that place is?" I leaned in, locking eyes with her. "Yeah, I do. I booked it." She opened her mouth, then closed it, the realization slowly dawning on her. I stood, crossing my arms. "And while we're on the topic, you might want to check your email." She frowned, fumbling with her phone, her thumb flying across the screen. I watched as her face palled, the color draining from her cheeks as she found the cancellation notice. The family cruise, the one I'd booked as a surprise, the one they probably already started bragging about to their friends, was gone. "Barbara," she whispered, her voice suddenly small, fragile. "Why? Why would you do this?" I stepped closer, my voice cold, the years of pent-up frustration sharpening every word. "Because I'm done. Done being your safety net. Done being the family ATM. Done pretending we're something we're not." Her kids had finally stopped wrestling and were now staring up at me, their small faces full of confused, wide-eyed silence. I met her gaze one last time. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting." I held the door open, and after a long, stunned moment, she herded her kids out, glancing back once as if she'd never seen me before. I closed the door behind her, the echo of her retreating footsteps lingering in the air. As I turned back to my desk, my phone buzzed again. A text this time from my Aunt Karen. "Karen, you ungrateful little brat. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" I let out a short, humorless laugh, tossed my phone onto the couch, and headed to my office. If they thought this was the end, they had no idea what was coming. It only took a few days for the full weight of what I'd done to sink in from my family. The missed calls and furious texts had slowed, but that uneasy silence was worse in a way, like the quiet before a storm. The first crack came when my cousin Jake, the one who had called me a freeloader over Lobster, decided to try the direct approach. I was in my office wrapping up a client presentation when my phone buzzed with his name. I let it ring. A few seconds later, another buzz, a voicemail. I put him on speaker, leaning back in my chair as his voice crackled through the line. "Yo, Barbara, look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. All right, that whole thing at dinner, it was just a joke, man. You know how Karen is always running her mouth? Don't take it so personally." I felt a slow, bitter smile creep onto my face. "Of course, When the freebies dried up, suddenly it was all just a misunderstanding. The voicemail kept going, his tone shifting from forced cheer to thinly veiled panic. Look, man, the cruise thing, you've gotta fix that. You know how much Mom and Dad were looking forward to it. They're freaking out. Just call me back. All right. I deleted the message, shaking my head. It was like they didn't even understand the concept of consequences. For years, they had picked at my patience, assumed my generosity would never run dry, convinced themselves I'd always be there to catch them when they stumbled. 2 days later, the second wave hit. My Aunt Karen, the one who had sparked this whole mess, showed up at my office. I watched her through the glass wall as my assistant led her in. Her face twisted into a tight, brittle smile that never reached her eyes. I closed my laptop, leaning back as she dropped into the chair across from me, her oversized handbag thudding against the side of my desk. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Barbara," she started, forcing a strained, saccharine tone. "I think we need to clear the air." I stayed silent, just raising an eyebrow. "Look, I know you've been under a lot of stress lately with the divorce and all." She waved a hand as if my entire life falling apart was just a minor inconvenience. But punishing the entire family over a silly misunderstanding isn't fair. I felt my jaw tighten, but I forced myself to stay quiet, to let her dig her own grave. I mean, your parents are devastated. You embarrassed them in front of the whole family, and now this cruise thing. Barbara, they're too old to handle this kind of shock. She leaned in, dropping her voice to a whisper, as if sharing some deep personal confidence. "You know how fragile your mother's heart is. You don't want that on your conscience, do you?" There it was, the guilt play. The same tired manipulation they'd been using on me since I was old enough to drive them to the airport for their last-minute free vacations. I met her gaze, holding it for a long, heavy moment. "Karen, you called me a freeloader at a dinner I paid for. You treated me like an outsider at my own event, and now you want me to apologize." She blinked, momentarily thrown off balance, then quickly recovered, her painted-on smile slipping for just a second. "Oh, come on. You know I didn't mean it that way. We're family. Family fights, then makes up." I leaned in, my voice low, icy. "Family doesn't bleed you dry, then laugh in your face when you finally stand up for yourself." She bristled, her fingers tightening around the strap of her handbag, the fake leather creaking under the pressure. For a moment, I thought she might actually let her real thoughts slip, let the mask crack, but then she forced that tight, brittle smile back into place. "Fine," she said, standing abruptly. "Be that way. But don't come crying to us when you realize how alone you are." She turned on her heel, her footsteps sharp against the polished tile as she stormed out. My assistant shot me a nervous glance as the door swung shut behind her, but I just waved it off, turning back to my laptop. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. A new text from my dad, the first I'd heard from him since the dinner. "Dad, son, we need to talk. This has gone too far." I let the phone fall back onto my desk, the screen flashing once before going dark. They still didn't get it. They thought this was just another round of family drama, something that would blow over with a few apologies and half-hearted hugs. They had no idea what was coming. A week passed, and the silence from my family was deafening. I knew them too well to think they'd just walk away quietly, though. They were regrouping, figuring out their next move, trying to come up with a plan to reel me back in. The first real sign of desperation came when my mother called. I let it go to voicemail, half expecting another guilt trip. But the message she left caught me off guard. "Barbara, honey, please call me. We miss you. I'm worried about you." I frowned, replaying it twice. It wasn't the same shrill, demanding tone my family usually used when they needed something. There was genuine fear in her voice, something I hadn't heard in years. I deleted it anyway, telling myself I dealt with enough of their emotional manipulation to know a trap when I saw one. But it didn't stop there. 2 days later, I pulled into my driveway to find my dad's old Chevy parked on the curb. I hadn't seen that rusted, paint-chipped beast in my neighborhood in years. My dad, the man who taught me how to tie a fishing knot and drive stick, was sitting on my front steps, a deep frown etched into his weathered face. I killed the engine and stepped out, tossing my keys in my hand as I approached. He stood, stuffing his hands into the pockets of his worn, grease-stained jacket. "Barbara," he said, his voice rough, "we need to talk." I bit back the urge to roll my eyes. This was classic him. Show up unannounced. Corner me on my own property. Force a confrontation. I unlocked my door, pushing it open, and stepping inside. He hesitated on the porch for a moment before following me in, the door swinging shut behind him. He glanced around, taking in the clean, modern lines of my home, the polished floors, the leather furniture. It was a stark contrast to the cluttered chaos of my parents' old, creaking house. "Nice place," he muttered, settling into one of my armchairs without waiting for an invitation. I leaned against the kitchen island, crossing my arms. "What do you want, Dad?" He hesitated, rubbing a callous hand over his stubble jaw. For a second, he looked like he might actually apologize, might acknowledge the years of silent tolerance I'd endured. Instead, he sighed heavily. "Look, your mother's a wreck. She's barely sleeping worrying about you. She feels like you've just abandoned the family." I felt my jaw clench, my fingers tightening on the cold granite edge of the countertop. "I didn't abandon anyone. I just finally decided to stop being your punching bag." His head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "Punching bag? You've got a nice house, a good job. We never asked you for anything you couldn't afford." I let out a bitter laugh. "You've been treating me like a walking ATM for years. You think I didn't notice all the loans that never got paid back? The guilt trips, the passive-aggressive digs at every family gathering?" He stood abruptly, his face wreathing. "We're family, Barbara. We help each other." "You've got all this," he said, gesturing around my living room, "and you're going to deny us a little help when we need it?" I pushed off the counter, stepping closer. "I'm not your safety net, Dad. I'm not your retirement plan. I'm not the backup for every bad decision this family makes." He stared at me, his face a mix of anger and something else, something like fear. For a moment, I thought he might actually swing at me like he had once when I was a teenager, and I dared to talk back. But then his shoulders slumped and he let out a long, shuddering breath. "Fine," he said, his voice suddenly small, almost defeated. "Fine, if that's how you want it." He stepped around me, heading for the door. Just as he reached it, he paused, one hand on the door-orc knob. "You know," he said without turning around, his voice tight, "money isn't everything, Barbara. One day, you're going to wake up and realize you've pushed everyone away." I didn't bother responding, as the door clicked shut behind him, his heavy footsteps echoing down the steps. I watched from the window as he slid back into his battered Chevy, the engine growling to life before he pulled away, leaving a faint trail of smoke in his wake. I stood there for a long moment, the house suddenly feeling too quiet, too big. I wanted to feel relieved, free, but instead a strange hollow ache settled in my chest, the kind that only comes from finally cutting the last thread, holding you to a past you should have walked away from years ago. But there was no going back now. A few more days passed, and the silence from my family started to feel like a slow-building storm. I kept expecting another unannounced visit or a barrage of guilt-laden texts, but it never came. Instead, the fallout found me in a way I hadn't anticipated. It started with my aunt, Karen. I was at the gym, halfway through a brutal set of deadlifts, when my phone buzzed on the bench. I ignored it at first, but when it kept vibrating, I finally dropped the bar, swiped my towel over my face, and checked the screen. "Karen, you know it's pathetic how you're acting, turning your back on family, shameful. Everyone knows you're just bitter because your wife left you." I stared at the message, the words searing into my brain. It was classic Karen. Take the lowest, most painful part of my life and twist it like a knife. I pocketed my phone, my hands shaking, with barely controlled anger. But it didn't end there. When I got back to my car, there were 3 more texts. "Jake, heard you're still sulking. You've always been weak. That's why she left you." "Amy?" Mom's been crying for days. I hope you're proud of yourself. Karen again. You might have money, but you'll always be alone. I gripped the steering wheel, the leather creaking under my fingers. They were trying to corner me, back me into the emotional trap they'd used for years. But this time, something in me had finally snapped. I wasn't the broken, guilt-ridden fool they thought I was. I went home, poured a glass of whiskey, and sat on my back porch, the evening air cool against my skin. I scrolled through the old family group chat, the one I'd muted months ago, and saw that the gossip had already spread. They turned me into the villain, the selfish son who cut his family off for no reason, the bitter divorce who lashed out because he couldn't handle his own failures. I took a long, slow sip of my drink, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I had one last card to play, and it was time to lay it down. I opened my laptop and pulled up my trust documents, the ones I'd had drawn up years ago when my business first took off. I'd always planned to leave a significant chunk to my parents, to help my sister's kids with college, to set up a fund for the whole family. It had felt like the right thing to do, a way to take care of the people I loved, even if they didn't always deserve it. I clicked through the pages, my cursor hovering over the line that listed my beneficiaries. Then, with a few quick keystrokes, I erased every single one of their names. My entire estate, every penny, would now go to charity. I sat back, my heart pounding, a strange, exhilarating mix of freedom and finality washing over me. They had pushed me to this point, had taken every ounce of kindness I had, and twisted it into something ugly. I closed my laptop, downed the rest of my drink, and watched the sun sink below the horizon, the sky burning with the last light of the day. As if on cue, my phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from my father. Dad, enough. Come to the house. Let's fix this. I let the message sit there unread, the screen slowly dimming as I set the phone aside. They thought this was still a game, still a cycle of blow-ups and apologies, of harsh words and reluctant hugs. They thought I'd come back like I always had. My head bowed, my pockets open, my heart still willing to forgive. But they were wrong. A few days after my dad's message, the final play came. It was a Sunday morning, the kind where the sunlight spills through the blinds and the world feels unnaturally calm. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my parents standing on my porch. My mom clutched her purse with both hands, her eyes red and puffy, while my dad stood stiffly beside her, his jaw set, the lines on his face deeper than I remembered. "Barbara," my mom started, her voice trembling. "Can we come in? We need to talk." I hesitated for a moment, then stepped back, letting them inside. They shuffled into my living room, glancing around at the carefully arranged furniture, the polished floors, the quiet order of a house I'd built without them. They sat down on my couch, my mom dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, my dad staring at his hands. I stayed standing, leaning against the kitchen island, crossing my arms as I waited for them to start. My mom looked up at me, her eyes glassy. "Barbara, honey, we're worried about you. We miss you. The family isn't the same without you." I said nothing, just watched as she twisted the tissue in her hands, her fingers shaking. "We know we've said some things," she continued, her voice cracking. We didn't mean them. You know how your aunt gets, how Jake can be. It was just a joke, that's all." I felt my jaw clench, the bitter taste of old, familiar resentment rising in my throat. They were trying to frame this as a misunderstanding, as if I had overreacted, as if they hadn't spent years chipping away at my self-respect. My dad cleared his throat, his deep voice rumbling through the room. "Son, this has gone on long enough. Your family. We shouldn't let a few harsh words tear us apart." I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Harsh words?" I echoed, my voice sharper than I intended. "Is that what you think this is about? A few harsh words?" My dad flinched, his eyes hardening. "You're acting like a child, Barbara. You think cutting us off makes you strong? It just makes you alone." I stepped forward. my pulse pounding in my ears. I'm alone because you all pushed me there. You treated me like a wallet with legs, a backup plan, a joke. You think I didn't notice the whispers at family dinners? The way you'd roll your eyes when I tried to talk about my life? You made me the outsider. And now you want me to come crawling back. My mom broke into a fresh wave of tears, clutching her tissue so tightly her knuckles turned white. My dad's face twisted, the muscles in his jaw working furiously as he struggled to find a response. "Barbara," he said, his voice low and strained. "We're your family. You owe us at least that much." I felt a cold, hollow laugh escape my lips. "I owe you?" I repeated, my eyes burning. "I've already given you more than you deserved. I paid your bills, covered your debts, held this family together while you took and took and took. And the one time I stand up for myself, you tried to drag me back down." My dad stood abruptly, his face flushed, his fists clenched. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me the way he had once when I was a teenager. But then he seemed to deflate, his shoulders sagging, his eyes avoiding mine. "Fine," he said, his voice tight, his chest heaving. "So be it. We'll manage without you, you fool." He turned sharply, grabbing my mom's arm and pulling her to her feet. She stumbled, letting out a small, broken sob as he dragged her toward the door. I followed them to the threshold, watching as they crossed the porch and headed down the steps. My mom paused, looking back at me one last time, her tear-streaked face twisted in a mask of grief and disbelief. I met her gaze, my heart pounding, my jaw set. She opened her mouth, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say something. But then my dad pulled her away, their footsteps echoing down the driveway. I closed the door, leaning my forehead against the cool wood for a long moment, my chest heaving. I waited for the regret, the guilt, the familiar ache of family ties pulling at my heart, but it never came. Instead, a strange, powerful calm settled over me, a quiet certainty that I had finally taken back my life. I straightened, took a deep breath, and let the door click shut behind me.